Well, good morning and welcome to the Spectrum Consulting Understanding Prevalent Disabilities and Support Strategies webinar. We thank you for joining us this morning. My name is Susanna Chance. I'll be facilitating the webinar today and running the background. Before we get started with the webinar, just a few housekeeping items. A little information about Spectrum Consulting. We are a consulting company that focuses on solutions related to human resources, strategic planning, and organizational development. We have a couple different lines of services. We have our consulting service that provides, direct consulting to a wide variety of customers. We do outsourcing of recruiting and other human resource functions, and we provide human resource specialized staffing services for both short-term and long-term solutions. If you visit our website, you're going to see a lot of great information. The website is spectrum.consulting, and on there you'll see some different blogs, like our Steve on Leadership blog. Steve's one of the presenters today, and he has a great way of taking a complicated topic or a book and putting it into a very short blog post and making it real and understandable. So you'll see those on the Spectrum website. You'll also see our popular Ask Fran column. It's like Dear Abby for human resources. And so Fran will answer questions related to people and management. And we also have on there insights, things that are going on, changes in labor laws, those kinds of things. So again, we hope you'll visit that website, spectrum.consulting. Today's sessions have been approved for 1 credit from the Human Resource Certification Institute. It's also good for 1 credit with the Society for Human Resource Management PDCs. So if you are working towards your certification, we will give you those numbers at the end of this session today. Finally, we welcome you to chat with us during today's webinar. This is the GoToMeeting panel that you should see on your screen, or something similar to this. If you don't see the big panel, click on that orange rectangle box with the arrow in it, and that would expand or contract the size of the box. And if you look at the bottom, you can see you can ask a question. I'll be monitoring those during the session today and jumping in if we have time to ask a question. We will be recording today's session, and the recording will be available on our website within 48 hours, usually it's sooner. I'll also be sending you out a survey after today's session that includes that link, and we appreciate any feedback that you have as far as today's session or any other topics that you'd like us to include. I'd like to introduce today's presenters. We're excited to have Ryan Mountain with us. Ryan is the Vice President of Career Services in our Work Opportunities Unlimited division. He has been here since he was a child in 1994. He started as a career resource specialist, became a director, and has held a variety of positions. Ryan is a very passionate about the work that we do in Work Opportunities, and he's a great leader of our programs. He serves now markets in Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Florida, D.C., Maryland, kind of all over that East Coast.
Get around.
He gets around. Ryan received his Bachelor of Arts from the University of New Hampshire and completed his graduate study in behavior management at Notre Dame College. Ryan has been here 20+ years, and he really has worked with a lot of individuals and employers in helping them facilitate natural supports or supports in the workplace that has helped the individual be successful. So we're really happy to have him here today talking about this topic. I'm also going to introduce Steve Wood. He's the president and CEO of our organization. He does work with Spectrum Consulting as well as leading Work Opportunities Unlimited. Steve's also a 20+ year here at the organization. Prior to coming to us, he spent 17 years in banking. He also ran a strategic planning consulting business and has been adjunct faculty for Southern New Hampshire University. He's also on the Rotary Club in Portsmouth and serves on the Economic Development Committee of the Business and Industry Association. So both of these guys have some great real-world experience that I think they'll be able to share with you today and hopefully give you some good ideas and resources that will be able to help you on this topic. So I'm going to turn it over to Steve. Again, don't hesitate to chat with us or ask a question along the way, and we'll be monitoring those during the session.
Thank you, Susanna. Welcome, everyone. You can probably see right away that we kind of organized this topic because this is National Disability Employment Awareness Month, which has been around for a long time. I read recently that it was started in 1945, so it's a month that's been in our awareness for quite some time. Today's webinar, Ryan's going to talk to us in greater detail about disability types. He's going to kind of cover intellectual disabilities and the autism spectrum disorder, which is the fastest growing, or at least the one that we're most aware of now, certainly the one that is affecting employers or impacting employers a lot. He's going to talk about hearing and visual impairments, about acquired brain injuries, and obviously mental health impairment. So those are the agenda topics for today. As I mentioned a second ago, it is National Disability Employment Awareness Month. October is established in 1945. The links down on this sheet that you can see that can take you to learning more about that. It's also, the theme this year is Inclusion Works, which is really a key factor. Larger employers today are really embracing this quite well. There's an article Ryan will probably talk about a little later if you're interested. It's called Brain Trust. It's published in the 2016 version of fastcompany.com. And if you go there and check that out, they describe the way that Microsoft is adapting their interview process for people with autism. And they talk about the success story of Blake Edickman's story, which is kind of cool. And Ryan will talk a little more about that later. And in any case, this is a special day because it's Disability Mentor Day. Those of you in your organizations that have mentorships developed, this is the day where we learn a little more about how to do that in the workplace, and you can see that link right there also under the second link. So in any case, let's turn it over to Ryan, and Ryan can start to share with us his knowledge about disabilities. Good morning, Ryan.
Good morning. Thanks, Steve. Thanks for having me. I'm happy to join you this morning. And as Susanna had said, I've had the great opportunity to work with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of individuals in a number of different states, a number of different job settings, and seen a lot of successes, a lot of challenges with a lot of the different disability types that we're going to talk about today. We could go on and actually train all day on each one of these. The point of today is to kind of give you a bit of the basics for those of you who might, whether you experience one of these disabilities, have family or friends that experience it, or an employee. Some of it might be review, but I think you'll pick up a few things as well. A lot of the support strategies that we're going to talk about are really from our perspective as an organization that helps develop jobs, works with employers, and provides job coaching. So these are kind of tried and true, some things that we've seen in the field. One of the first points that I really want to make is don't let the disability define the person. All right, we're going to talk about these disability types: autism spectrum disorder, intellectual disability, but each person, that might experience that particular disability, they have different interests, different skills, and I've just seen so many different characteristics of individuals that might experience Down syndrome, for example. They're just not all the same. There are some consistent factors, some consistent support needs, but you want to keep in mind that each person's an individual. So don't let the disability define the person. All right, well, let's take a look. I'm going to jump right into it now. Intellectual disability we're going to start with. So intellectual disability, and you see the second bullet, was formerly referred to as mental retardation. So the current acceptable term for this disorder would be intellectual disability, so ID as it's commonly referred to. You can see from the first bullet the characteristics, significant limitations in intellectual functioning and adaptive behavior, onset before the age of 18. I also want to point out that there are some disabilities that have both an intellectual component and a physical component as well. Down syndrome would be one of those. Fragile X syndrome is another, as well as fetal alcohol syndrome. Intellectual disability, within our field, often it's defined as an IQ below 70. In fact, a lot of individuals, in order to qualify for funding, they would need to test at an IQ level below 70 to qualify. I also want to point out the last bullet here on this slide, only 1 in 2 individuals with cerebral palsy have an intellectual disability. Now, I've included this because for those of you who've interacted with someone with cerebral palsy, and of course every person's different, you've got people that might have it more, more profound than others, but it presents fairly severely. So you might think that there's an intellectual component there or a deficit there, but not necessarily. 1 in 2 individuals with CP do not experience an intellectual disability, which I think is an interesting thing to know. Causes, you might ask, well, what causes an intellectual disability? Well, believe it or not, 1/3 of individuals that experience this, we don't know. We don't know what the cause is. For the other 2/3, typical causes might be heredity, prenatal problems, childhood illness, environmental issues, and they occur at birth or later in life. Now let's talk about support strategies for this population, individuals that experience this. Now this first bullet, you're going to hear this over and over again. And this, it doesn't matter if the person has a disability or not, first of all. You don't want to lower your expectations. But this is a common thing we see with employers, is that they see someone with a disability, especially the physical, the person with a Down syndrome, the person with cerebral palsy, and they immediately say, well, they can't do all these things. So we lower our expectations on that job. I would encourage you not to do that, because part of what we do as a provider of job coaches is we help them on that journey to get this person to meet your expectations of the employer. That's our role, that's your role, and part of what we do is coach you to help them to do that. But you want to keep the bar high, because that's how they develop and how you get an employee that's going to meet your needs. So very important, and that's going to be a consistent theme throughout all of these disabilities. We want to start by implementing the normal training and supervision practices of any employee. Don't assume that the person can't learn the tasks and the responsibilities that you normally train anyone that enters your organization. Start there, and then we work our way back. If modifications are needed, assistive technology is needed later, we can look at that, but always start with what's natural. Set clear expectations with a step-by-step series of tasks. I think we all could use that. It really doesn't matter if we have a disability or not. We want to set clear expectations. True, the person with the intellectual disability might have more of a challenge if it's not clearly set as far as the expectations, but everyone benefits, especially the person with the intellectual disability. We want to implement hands-on learning of the task. Okay, now this is important for anyone. Most people learn best, I would raise my hand to this, when they're trained the job in the environment and where it actually occurs. It's very difficult and challenging to learn in a classroom setting and then apply it somewhere else at a later time. The person with the intellectual disability will definitely benefit from training in the actual environment where the job occurs. You could expect that if there was classroom training or an orientation and then they were needed to apply that later, maybe days later, there might be difficulty. But if that's your normal process, start there. If we start to notice they're not meeting expectations, that's when we start to a stage where we might need to supplement such things as visual aids, checklists, feedback, regular communication, both constructive and positive from the supervisor. All of those things can help the person bridge that gap between not meeting expectations and meeting expectations. I can't overstate the importance of this final bullet. Communicate directly to the individual, including both positive and constructive feedback. And this comes into play if you're an organization that utilizes or has utilized a provider of a job coach. This is where this comes into play. And I believe we have some people on this call as well who employ job coaches. So this would be significant to basically pay attention to right now as well. We have to remember that the employer is the supervisor, not the job coach. The job coach's main role is to coach coworkers and supervisors to know what to communicate and when to get the most out of that person. We're talking about a person with a disability in this case, so that they are a successful employee for you, the employer. A lot of cases, and rightly so, it's definitely understandable, we are viewed by the employer, especially a supervisor who doesn't have a lot of experience with people with disabilities, as the experts. We're the ones that know how to work with a person with the intellectual disability. And to a great degree, that's true. However, you, the employer, you know your business. You know what you need. You know your work environment. So it's really working together. So what we really train and encourage job coaches to do is supplement, what you're doing if supplemental training is needed, work with the employer and coworkers on communication methods and learning styles so that they can effectively work with this person with a disability, and really kind of tap into your knowledge of the job site and help us all solve the issue, which is how do we get this person from not meeting expectations to meeting expectations. That's the main role of the job coach. I've had it said to me before by an employer, a very successful, well-meaning employer, the person always performs better when your job coach is here. That's usually a red flag, because what that tells me is that that individual with a disability thinks the job coach is the employer. They identify the job coach as the supervisor. Whose fault is that? I look at myself as a job coach and say, I'm not doing my job because I need to be creating supports, creating the open lines of communication between the supervisor and the individual, so that individual knows who the real supervisor is, so that the job coach doesn't have to be there, because that person's going to perform because they know who's signing the check. It's not the job coach.
Ryan, they often refer to that now as natural supports, right?
Absolutely. Common term would be natural supports. The facilitation of natural supports is what we call in our industry. And that's something we can surely train employers on. It's a bit of our jargon, so some cases people don't quite know if they're not in the industry what that refers to. But it's really building capacity within you, the employer, to work effectively with this person so you get the most out of them and there's a successful employee-employer relationship. All right, autism spectrum disorder. Very interesting. One of the fastest growing, and it's hard to know exactly why. Part of the theories are that we recognize it, when in years past we didn't. So we're diagnosing it earlier. If you have an individual in your family that has autism, or son or daughter, early intervention is something that they're saying is extremely important to help the person develop early and to kind of minimize some of the longer-term issues that could come from autism spectrum disorder. So it is a neurodevelopmental disorder, impairs the ability to communicate, interact with others. It includes restricted repetitive behaviors, interests, and activities. It is a spectrum. So you could have a person that presents maybe a little socially awkward to us, right on to the other end of the spectrum where you have someone that's nonverbal. They seem detached from what's going on around them, especially from other people. There's a wide range of individuals, and we've worked with everyone along that spectrum. We've seen a lot of different things, a lot of different people. They have difficulty noticing and interpreting the social world. It may include sensory processing disorder. So that is a condition where things like light, touch, even rain on the skin can feel painful. Sounds. In effect, what it is, it's a challenge with incoming stimuli. There's a chasm. There's a disconnect between what's coming in and what's going out. And that's part of what we need to understand, but the person's in there, and many possess very or exceptional visual, musical, and academic skills, and 40%, look at this last bullet here, 40% have above average intellectual abilities. Important to know, but the issue is mostly the social. So you can have someone that has behaviors such as flapping of the hands or arms, humming, rocking. This is a way for them to manage the stimuli. Okay, this is a behavior where they're managing the stimuli coming in. And so part of what we need to do is recognize what that is. But it can be scary. It can be scary to someone that has not experienced it before. But once you begin to understand it and you can teach replacement behaviors for whatever the function of that behavior is, then it starts to make more sense. Okay, I want to tell you a little story. I've got two stories today. The lower left-hand corner, you see a gentleman, his name is Chris. And the theme of this story is really how an alternate way of interviewing will get you someone that can perform the essential functions of the job. And Steve mentioned earlier there's an article called Brain Trust. And so I encourage you to take a look at that. It's about Microsoft, and they have quite an initiative to change, for certain jobs, the way they interview. So rather than a question and answer across the table traditional interview that someone with autism would have a lot of difficulty performing well in, they have decided, well, you know what, we really don't need that for these jobs. Why are we interviewing people in a method that has nothing to do with the skills we need for them to effectively perform these jobs? So they said, all right, let's do kind of a 3-day tour, informal question and answer, have them try the job. That's the initiative that they've started, as well as a mentorship program as well. So I encourage you to read that article. It's called Brain Trust, and you'll see that in fastcompany.com in the September 2016 issue. Chris is a perfect example of how this can work. So Chris was someone that presented, he would, when I talked earlier about the stimuli, if something was a little bit out of sorts, wasn't quite part of their normal routine, there was a change, you could expect high-pitch humming, you could expect potentially jumping around, you could expect him to say, it is not good, a number of times. His sentences were not full, they were fragmented, but he had certain things that he would say to indicate that there was an issue. No way is he going to walk into a business, apply for a job, submit his resume, and do an kind of across the table traditional interview. Not going to happen. So we had to facilitate this placement. And I know there's some individuals from organizations that were kind of wondering about how do you facilitate a job for someone with severe disabilities. And it really comes down to relationships. You've got to build relationships with an employer. You can't just apply and submit resumes, cross your fingers, and wait for the phone to ring. It's not going to work. The employer needs to be prepared. We, as job developers, need to meet with employers, learn about their hiring needs, and then when we see there's a match, like here with Chris, we help facilitate that. It's all about relationships. It's not a door-to-door, knock on the door, hey, I've got someone that needs a job. It's a we're meeting with you, Mr. and Mrs. Employer, to find out what you need, and then we'll see if we have someone that we think will fit. So back to Chris. All right, so I mentioned his behaviors or his communication style. So we did not do a traditional interview with him. We prepared the employer for what they were going to experience and what he likely would do or say. And so that we thought kind of a walk around, tour the facility, show him the machine that needed to, was the essential part of the job, and some informal questions. Worked well. Worked well enough that he was hired. I can tell you now, he has since retired. A very successful placement here. What they needed someone to come in every day because they needed that machine to churn out pieces. They wanted that rubber molded. They needed to be perfect. They needed to have so many done. They needed those orders filled, and they wanted someone there. Well, they didn't need customer service. They didn't need anyone to do the phones, which Chris would not be good at, but this he would, because he will be there every day. He will do it exactly the way they train him, and he does not want to socialize. So they don't have to worry about production issues. He's not going to turn over to someone else and say, hey, how you doing? He wants to get that job done. That's his main mission. Where you might have an issue is if he came in one day and the machine was gone. Or you just sprung it on him and said, hey, you're going to be doing something different. Come with me. You're likely to see the humming. You're likely to see the flapping. You're likely to see some jumping around. That gets me to kind of the support strategies. Again, do not lower expectations. As you can see with Chris in the story, he did really, really well with the job he needed to do. You want to provide, and this is what he needed, highly structured training, step by step. And you want to really, I recommend you get it right the first time. That really, I know with Chris in particular, you have the training and you set that up. Constant changes would be a challenge for him. But rest assured, when he is trained, he will do it exactly the way you train him. You want to provide smooth transitions. So I just said a moment ago, if they wanted to do something different, that's fine, but we have to say, okay, Chris, next Monday, I'm going to have you do a different machine. All right, let me show it to you. What is likely to happen? He would say it is not good, and it would cause him some anxiety. But it wouldn't be as bad as if we just, on Monday, took him to a different room and said, this is what you're doing today. So kind of a smooth, let him know what's going to happen, ease him into it, and he can be successfully transitioned. Understand the behavior can be in response to certain stimuli. This is kind of the more important thing for us all and for coworkers, is that when you see that person that all of a sudden there's a high-pitched hum, it can be startling. You know, what is that? Something's going on. There's something out of the ordinary, and they're having difficulty articulating that. So part of it is recognizing, okay, there's something amiss here. What is it? Can we have the person tell us? If not, what do we think it is? And then remedy the situation. All right. Hearing and visual impairments. Move along a little quicker. I could talk about these topics all day. I think you could tell. Very interesting. I found all the individuals with these disabilities very, very interesting. Hearing and visual impairments. Some individuals are born with the hearing and visual impairment, and some individuals have it occur later in life. So in some cases, especially with the latter individuals, you know, they're kind of coping with, wow, all of a sudden my sight or my hearing is limited or potentially gone. That in and of itself, usually they're going to be working with an occupational therapist. They're going to be coping with that as far as their day-to-day lives. And then so usually there's a gap between, all right, I'm dealing with this, and now I got to go back to work. So we often see there is a fear of that return to work. But as you'll see from this last bullet, if I can get it to, oops, it's on the next page, sorry. Work is very important as far as the person kind of getting back on track, getting that self-worth back, self-confidence, and we see great successes with people going to work. We find that people who are out of work, the longer they're out of work, the more challenge it is to go back to work, excuse me. Very prevalent disabilities here. As you can see some statistics which I've provided for you. 15% of adults aged 18 years or older report some trouble hearing. 2 to 3 children out of 1,000 born in the U.S. have a detectable hearing loss. You can see 22 million Americans aged 18 or older experience vision loss. In some cases, there could be some behavioral or emotional challenges, especially for individuals who have experienced a kind of a degenerative issue with the vision or hearing. Those that might have been born with a condition have a number of workarounds and have been for a number of years, you know, working on their everyday life and might have their own adaptive equipment that they have and have a lot of ways that they can get through their everyday life. They've basically been able to adapt and can be very successful at work. Some things I want to say, too, about an individual who might have had this disability happen to them later in life as it develops, is that we find we get a lot of people, they've got a wealth of knowledge in a particular industry. They've had a career. They've been a professional for years and years and years, and now here's this new challenge. But they have a lot to offer. So it's a matter of us trying to get the person back to their industry, maybe back into that line of work. Maybe it's not going to be exactly the way it was before hearing or the vision loss, but they have a lot of knowledge. So we find ourselves facilitating jobs for those individuals back into their career fields in some form or fashion. Okay, well, let's see. We've got a poll question, Susanna.
I have one ready to go.
All right, let's do a poll question. Because I've been rambling on now. I apologize.
Not rambling, right?
It's not rambling?
Fascinating.
Fascinating? Okay.
Fascinating.
So the poll is, have you been involved with providing direction and or support to an employee who experiences one of the featured disabilities, either that Ryan talked about or one that's coming up? So you can just, we'll keep this open for a minute or so. It's a quick answer, a yes or
Yep.
no, and then we'll share the results with the group.
All right, great, thanks. Wrapping up hearing in visual support strategies. Mentorship program, a great opportunity for someone within your organization to develop. Could even take it as far as learning American Sign Language. But most organizations have some sort of a mentorship program. We have a mentorship program. And although we have approximately 250 employees, they're spread out. And in our offices across the East Coast, we could have anywhere from 5 to 15 people, yet we still have mentors for new employees that come on board. This would just be more involved, but it's a way to supplement what management is doing. Some other little tips: you want to speak directly to the person who's visually or hearing impaired. For someone who's visually impaired, greet them with your name when entering the room and let them know when you leave. Especially new environments, you're in a sense kind of narrating what's happening and who's in the room. You want to be specific when giving directions or describing locations. One thing, and I saw this implemented recently, a light tap on the shoulder is acceptable to get the attention of someone with a hearing impairment. And there's some accommodations, which of course with today's technology, you can see with vision impairment, we have things that can help reduce glare, utilization of voicemail, screen magnification, screen reader, large print, lighting adjustment. And for hearing impairment, I mean, really, we're attached to our phones now, smartphones. You can text, there's instant message. You can interact with someone for quite some time and never know that they have a hearing impairment in their job because it doesn't affect the essential functions.
You want to see those results, Ryan?
Sure.
Great. So it's sort of a split, 55%
Okay.
have been involved with providing direction or support, and 45% have not.
Okay.
Thank you.
And Ryan, before you go on, we have
Sure.
a question from one of our participants. They said they have an employee who's now experiencing hearing difficulties, and how can I assist her to do her job and not impact the job of others?
Okay. Well, it sounds like that's a situation where it's kind of occurring now. So they didn't come into the job with it. They're experiencing more of, did you say Steve was hearing?
Yes.
Hearing loss. And a lot has to do with the prognosis of that too. Is it expected to get worse? And kind of the severity of it as far as the different accommodations that you could use that would help the person do their job and not affect, the production level of coworkers. You could, there's some online resources that could help. I know even Job Accommodations Network, which is really geared towards employers for things such as this. They even have a feature called Ask Jan, so you could start there. But also vocational rehabilitation. Now, this person may or may not be connected with them, especially if they're starting to experience this. But if they're experiencing it and it's starting to affect their work, they would be eligible for services with vocational rehabilitation. And even if you don't go that route where the person gets or applies for services, I'm pretty sure if you contact a vocational rehabilitation and they have counselors that are dedicated to both those with vision loss and hearing loss, that they would consult with you on it. So placing a call to your local VR office and saying, hey, this is going on. But I would say, first of all, you would want to, have these discussions with this person to say, okay, so what's happening? Where are you having challenges? Let's see what we can solve. All right, well, we're at a loss. Why don't we look into vocational rehabilitation, see if we can get someone to consult with us on this? This person may be doing that already, especially, like I said, if it's expected to get worse. So that's the recommendation. So an online piece would be Job Accommodations Network. A local in-person would be a counselor who specializes in this. That would be right local to you. Thanks, Steve. Okay. Acquired brain injury. Damage to the brain which occurs after birth. Traumatic brain injury would include those that might happen at birth, during birth. Some of the causes, you can see here: trauma, stroke, bleeding, lack of oxygen, infections, toxicity, fluid, tumors. Now, what happens? How is the person affected? How is this going to affect you as the employer? Well, these are some of the common things, but I want to repeat what I said at the outset, which is Everybody's different, and I can tell you, I can think of 2 people off the top of my head. One of them I'm going to speak to you in just a minute, who were so different. You both had acquired brain injuries, but they were just so very different. Their support needs were different. Their emotions were different. Attitude was different. So you got to keep that in mind. But in a lot of cases, concentration's affected to varying degrees, emotions, memory, stamina, gait, speech, because a lot of these things, depending on the situation or the accident, they're learning to do them again. And so that brings me to story. You can see this gentleman, lower left-hand corner. Let me just pull up my bullets while I tell you about this guy. All right, so this is Alex. Alex is a very inspirational guy. In June of 2011, age 20, typical college student, sophomore, summer break, and he just decided he was going to change his major from marine biology to education. He wanted to be a teacher like his mom. Great social network, big lacrosse player. Bam, like that. Car accident. Everything's changed. So from there, he was in rehab for a year. He had to learn how to walk again, learn how to talk. Has short-term memory issues, still does. Stamina is a challenge. His speech somewhat slurred, a little bit labored. But through it all, he's made the most positive attitude. Regardless of disability, acquired brain injury, anything, you don't have a disability, he's one of the most positive people I've ever met. Given his situation, if there was anyone that could be bitter about anything, it would be this guy, not Alex. He's decided he's not going to let anything stop him. 2 years later, he gets his first job at an ice cream shop. Coworkers, employers, supervisors gravitate towards his positive attitude. They are willing to jump in, train him, give him lists, whatever it's going to take to help him perform this job because his attitude was that positive. He ended up making all the different flavors of ice cream, which is a step-by-step, very detailed process. He had lists, recipes for each one. He was able to do it. He needs frequent breaks, though, for the stamina piece, but the employer was more than happy to accommodate that. He since has really developed an affinity for cooking. This is kind of the first step for him. So he actually gave his notice and has transitioned to a new job at Wegmans, and he is working in the bakery department and baking bread and muffins and bagels and is really, really happy. In addition, he has his driver's license, he has his own car, and he's 1 course away from his associate's degree, maintaining a positive attitude throughout. Very inspirational, great guy. He will no doubt go on to fantastic things. Susan, you want to do another poll?
I do, Ron.
Okay.
I'm just going to launch that poll here. The question is, have you utilized an alternate interview format in order to accurately assess whether or not a candidate with a disability can do the position?
Okay, it's a good one. We talked about that earlier about Chris and the Brain Trust article. All right, while you guys are working on that poll question, ABI support strategies. All right, so, and these are things that definitely benefited Alex. Reduce distractions. You want to have kind of a clean work environment, reduce clutter, you want to be organized. That kind of gets things off on the right foot. You may end up using visual aids. Repetition, because you got to get things into the long-term memory bank. So repetition, lists, over and over and over routine. Many changes, potentially is going to be a problem. Keep in mind, though, everybody's different. So we don't want to label and say if you have ABI, well, you can do a complicated, ever-changing set of responsibilities. Not necessarily the case. Like I said earlier, always start with what you want, which is the natural training. Work back from there if accommodations need to be made. Potential is with someone with ABI, you might have to do that. All right, you might recognize, all right, we got to start using lists. Have to be very detailed. Let's keep it the same routine. And then just like Alex with making ice cream, he's got it. I'm sure he can, make pistachio and mint patty, no problem. Allow recordings of meetings and training sessions if needed. And break down those duties into the smallest tasks. It's going to be most helpful for someone with ABI. All right, let's go on. Do we have results, Susanna, yet?
I do have the results. It looks like this is one that isn't utilized often. 71% have not used an alternate interview strategy. I know that we've done them sometimes, interviews via chat function with someone that had communication challenges, and that was a great way to be able to have a conversation.
Absolutely. I know we implement field interviews, which is more of that kind of walking interview. We do kind of a traditional interview, or could be over the phone first, and then have the person come see the job and see them in action. That's something that you could implement. But it's something that as your organization, and we talked about, this being, Disability Month, Awareness Month, to kind of look and say, hey, do we have jobs we have trouble filling? Do we have jobs that may be high turnover? And is our screening process screening people out that could be great? Like with autism is it's the obvious one, because socially they're going to have great difficulty with the interview. I mean, how would you feel if you're interviewing someone, you're sitting across the table from them, you're asking a question, and they're just looking down? They're not saying anything.
We're looking for eye contact.
Right. We're looking for eye contact, and this is not going to happen. But yet the person could be fantastic in attendance, like Chris. If something was going to get in the way of Chris going to work, like a snowstorm, that was a problem. He wanted to be there every day. So hugely, quite valuable. So you just want to look at that, I guess, and look and just see, is our interview practice, are our questions and the way we do it, is it allowing the right people in, or is it screening them out? We've got one more disability we're going to talk about here, mental health. Quite prevalent. 1 in 4 adults are likely to experience some form of mental impairment in a given year. It is quite likely that some of us on this call, people in your organization, experience this sort of quite effectively on their own, a number of different techniques. Yoga could be one. I mean, just different ways to manage stress and anxiety. There'll be a lot of different ways they self-manage. It may include medication. It may include therapy. It may include a combination. Everyone's different. These are some of the impairments that it might include. There are others. Bipolar, these are some of the ones you might see more often. Bipolar, and you've got attention deficit and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Work, very important. It's proven. We know we can get the person working in a successful job. They build self-confidence. They have that sense of self-worth. You start to see it snowball in a good way. But how do we support this individual that might experience one of these? Well, again, shocker, we want to be clear with our expectations and provide ongoing feedback. I say that's the number one thing I would say with people experiencing mental health is open lines of communication. Supervisors want to be providing the constructive and positive feedback, having the person self-assess during feedback sessions, and keeping the communication open, and keeping their eyes and ears open to attendance issues and tardiness, which sometimes could be a sign that there is some sort of issue that the person might be having trouble coping with. Could be a coworker, could be the stresses of the job, could be customer. So we want to just stay aware. Utilize that positive reinforcement, especially for someone that might have been out of work for a while. Role play and troubleshooting, help build those coping skills. And really, if you look at these things, all these things would be great for anybody, right? I mean, it really doesn't matter, if you've got a mental health challenge or not. Attendance issues, kind of keep your eyes and ears open. In supporting individuals with the physical component, you can see it. You can see the person's disability. So it's more socially acceptable or reasonable for coworkers to see job coaches on site. We're on site. But with mental health, the person presents, speaks, performs the job task. There's no visual challenge whatsoever. So you can see that if we had job coaches on site, it's actually more of a hindrance than a help. It can cause a problem. So we do more of our support off-site, but it's got to be proactive, not reactive. And that's what I encourage supervisors to do as well, is being proactive and having regular communication with this person, as we hopefully would try to do with everybody, versus reactive, too late. We are very proactive, but it's off-site. So what we typically will do, questioning the individual, trying to determine if there's any smoldering issue, it might be a problem, something they might need some advice on. But we also want to do that with employers. So we've had, whether it's regular communication via email, meetings, by phone, we want to get the person issue that needs to be worked out. That's when we come in as a consultant. delivering feedback and to self-assess. You know, how did last week go? How did that meeting go? How did that project go? What do you feel? Because you're hopefully that they're going to identify anything that needs to be improved upon themselves. I think any
A couple of questions have come in,
Sure.
and maybe related to the last poll question too. So, Susanna, could you do the next poll question, and then I'll ask Ryan a question while people are responding.
The question is, have you utilized the job coach at your organization to assist your team and the individual in meeting job expectations? Again, it's a quick yes or no.
And the question about that is, do you have any suggestions for how employers can effectively work with job coaches or vendors of employment services?
And if the job coach is involved, you want to make sure the job coach knows it as well. So the individuals, you don't on the sidelines. You don't want that. You want the three of you to be together. Now the job coach is aware of it. These are the areas we need improvement on. What's my role? What's the job coach doing? And establish the communication and frequency of supports. So you want to know, okay, job coach, in order for this to be successful, how often are you going to be here? How often are we going to communicate? So everyone's clear. Because one of the common things I hear, and we often hear this when we meet with employers and they talk about previous experiences with job coaches, they say, yeah, he was here for a while and then he just disappeared. We don't know what happened. That should be established. The job coach should be doing it, but you as a supervisor, I mean, you want to make it happen. You make sure it happens. So what you want to be doing is saying, all right, so for the first 2 weeks, you're going to be here every day, supplementing our training, working with our coworkers to communicate effectively with Chris. Okay, great. Let's meet after 2 weeks. Then that might fade. I mean, that's likely to fade because each of these individuals, they have access to different levels of funding. A lot of it's based on the severity of their challenge. And so in some cases, there's not going to be able to be support 100% of the time. So we have to be working on natural supports. We have to be working on the independence for it to be successful long term. For some individuals, they do get that though. They do get the long-term one-on-one. So I think it's important to establish up front what are things going to look like long term here. So anyway, hope that's helped, Steve.
Susanna, what's the poll result? I have another couple questions for Ryan.
I have the results here. Again, we've got 46 that have utilized a job coach and 54% have not utilized a job coach.
All right, no, 50-50.
So a couple more questions for Ryan, but if any of you have questions about job coaching and you want to ask Ryan, feel free to write those in your question box and Susanna can ask those of Ryan in a minute. Ryan, do you have any suggestions? Sometimes when people have a mental health issue, one of the first symptoms of that is attendance.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any tips for employers that start to recognize attendance problems and how they might mitigate or manage the situation to improve it?
Yeah, well, typically they'll be pretty aware of it, most likely. Someone is late or not coming in at all. I think opening up those lines of communication and recognizing that something might be going on. And it might not necessarily be at work, it could be at home. But I think if the attendance issues are happening, bringing the person in, which typically, is what you're going to do with really anyone, is coming in, sitting them down and saying, hey, this is what's going on. This is what doesn't, as far as your attendance goes, this is not working, for us. We need to have you here X amount of days. You've been out X amount of days in the last 2 weeks. What is there, anything I can help with? Is there anything here at work, that can be done? Kind of asking those questions, because typically, if you do the old, hey, how are things going? person's going to say, fine. So you've got to kind of ask those questions, and it is helpful to know them a little bit. So if the employee's been with you for a while, you have more insight into them. But really asking more probing questions like, so how is it going with, I know we've got a coworker that sits next to you. How's it going with him? Or maybe you've got a new supervisor or a branch supervisor that you know their communication style can be a little curt. You might say, so how's it going with Bruce? How's it going with the training that he's providing you? So it's really investigating to try to pull it out. And that's what we do. You know, if you as supervisors can do it or train your supervisors to do it, that's fantastic. But that's something that we, who've done this quite a bit, are trained to do. So that's
great.
And
Ryan, I didn't know if because we have a few minutes left.
Yeah.
Do you want to touch on retention plans, what they are, and the value they are to both employers and the individuals that may have some barriers?
Sure. Retention plans is, you know, that's kind of a label of a document that we use, but essentially it is what I've been describing, you know, throughout the past hour, which is identifying expectations of the job. And again, don't lower the bar, the expectations of the position, not the expectations of the person with a disability. A lot of times people see those differently. So we'll stick with the job. And then if you have someone that enters the job, again, you're training them on the normal processes of that job, but then you start to notice there's some issues. And wow, shocker here, but guess what? You don't have to have a disability to have issues where you're not meeting expectations. I think we all know that. So you're identifying these are 1, 2, 3, 4 things that we'd like you to improve upon. Not out of the ordinary. Doesn't mean you're going to get fired. It means we want you to improve so you're better and better as an employee. So you identify those things, and then comes the real tricky part. The real tricky part is, what are we going to do about it? And it could be any number of things. It could be strategies regarding frequency of communication method with the person. It could be a change in their job, change in their workstation, change in how things are organized. It's real simple things. Easy accommodations like assistive technology that doesn't really cost anything. Utilizing texting more, emails more, bringing an interpreter in for group meetings, which I've seen done be very successful but not necessarily needed the day-to-day. So it's identifying what are we going to do, which a lot of times the identifying what those kind of interventions or strategies would be may be a little bit more in depth and a little more creative than what you might be used to where someone doesn't experience one of these disabilities.
Great. Thank you, Ryan. You want to touch on a few resources and then
Sure.
Shannon can wrap it up?
I mentioned earlier Job Accommodations Network. That's a great one you can find online. Some of you might have tapped into that one already. But you can learn about a lot of different disabilities there, and they're also there as consultants for you. So I encourage that. Each one of these bullets represents a major website for each of the disabilities we talked about. I'm familiar with Autism Speaks, a very good organization, so I definitely recommend you look into that one. One of the resources that isn't here, but I had mentioned earlier, was vocational rehabilitation. It's a great state agency, state and federal funded, geared towards helping people who are unemployed or underemployed who experience a disability find and maintain employment. That's their goal. And they have certified rehabilitation counselors. Some of them specialize in things like autism, visual impairments, hearing impairments. And they would be more than happy, I'm sure, if you said, hey, we're really interested in bringing in people that might have a visual impairment or autism. I'm sure they'd be more happy to consult with you. Also, there are providers of service such as us. We oftentimes find ourselves doing the legwork, get our funding from vocational rehabilitation. You could use us or other providers that provide this work. Behind the scenes, they're typically funding sources and counselors that kind of manage the cases of those individuals up. So we got someone trying to butt into my show here. You can just silence it. It's on the side. You can see Susanna does not have an iPhone.
I don't have an iPhone.
Okay, there we go. We killed it. As I close, I don't know if you guys, was there another question or two?
No, I think we're good.
All right, so I just want to wrap up with 3 key points. First, don't let the disability define the person. Alex is a perfect example of why you don't want to do that. He's someone that you would, even if at first you're not quite sure what he's going to do and how he's going to fit into the organization, you want to find a way. Number 2, don't let your interview process screen out individuals who could perform the essential functions of the job. Chris, perfect example of this. They would have missed out on him and probably gone through a number of people that didn't want to stand there and operate that machine and were there day after day. And 3, don't lower your expectations. Don't lower your expectations of the job and of the person, regardless of whether they have a disability or not. So I want to leave you with those 3 key things, but I congratulate everyone for listening to my, my fast speak. I hope it didn't go by too quickly. But thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Ryan. You always have a lot of great information. And I think that sometimes those of us in human resources are kind of in charge of this thing, understand these concepts, but the trick really can be working with supervisors and having them understand, why do we want to maintain expectations and how might we ask questions. And certainly that's a way that Ryan could be a resource, or we could be a resource if you need some training with supervisors or some additional support on those topics, because it is sometimes the execution and implementation of that that's really the key. We have one more webinar left on our schedule for this year. We are excited. It's in November, and attorney Naomi Butterfield from Bernstein Shore is going to be joining us. She's doing a follow-up on her webinar from last year where she talked about conducting investigations kind of globally. In this webinar, she's going to be talking about how do you actually do the investigation meeting. So she's going to be giving us tips and kind of a framework for how we set that up and how we actually do it. So that's going to be a great session. We are working on 2017 topics. Certainly, as you get your survey from us, if you don't mind, it's very quick. If you don't mind, though, letting us know if there are some topics that would really be helpful to you. We'll take those into consideration as we're putting that together. Finally, those numbers for you, if you're getting your certification numbers, if it's the HRCI numbers, it's number 263979, Understanding Basic Disabilities and Support Strategies is the title. Again, it's 263979. If you're going for the SHRM credits, it's activity 16-MF6MQ. Again, it's 16-MF6MQ. So I'll have Ryan hold those up there for a second. Again, we thank you for joining us today. We hope you got some useful information, some takeaways that you can use in your workplace. And we did record the session. Like I said, it will be posted on our website within 48 hours at spectrum.consulting. And if you go to the webinars page where you registered for this, it'll now say listen, and you'll be able to listen to the session. Feel free to share that link with others or with the supervisory group if you have it that you want to talk about this topic. We're also going to put the slides up there. So if you have an interest in those, you'll be able to download those. Thanks again for your time. We appreciate it. Thanks again, Ryan, Steve, and we'll see you next month.
Okay, thank you.